Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining today's Resideo webinar session. We are excited to be providing an overview of dehumidification basics. My name is Jamie Quanrud, and I'm part of the Resideo Sales Training Team. And on behalf of all of us on the call today, I'd like to welcome you to our training session. And before we get started with our technical overview, I'd like to cover just a few administrative items. Make sure that you join us each month as we provide you 2 opportunities to learn about our Resideo products. Please visit resideo.com/webinars for more information on these topics. Today we are covering dehumidification basics, and next week on April 27th, we are going to be talking about UV air purification. And additionally, we have already listed the May schedule of webinars already on the website. So be sure to visit resideo.com/webinars under that HVAC tab and register for those upcoming sessions. And additionally, you can find recorded sessions on this same website underneath that webinar recordings tab if you're ever unable to attend any of our live sessions. And then for our contractors who are joining us for today's live session and you are interested in earning 1 NATE continuing education credit, there are just a few things to note. If you have provided your NATE ID on your registration form, we submit that information to NATE for your attendance of each live session, and we won't need any additional information from you at this time. However, if you did not provide us with your NATE ID on that registration form for today's webinar and you'd like to receive credit for attending our live session, we do ask that you email your first name, your last name, your NATE ID, and the date of the session that you attended to homes.university@resideo.com within 1 week from today. This information is submitted to NATE 1 week following the close of each session. Any requests that are sent outside of 1 week from this live training cannot be processed. And as a reminder, we can only process requests for NATE credits when you attend the live webinar sessions, and we are unable to process requests for watching a recorded version of any of these sessions. If you'd like more information about the NATE program, please visit their website at www.natex.org. One quick note before we begin our technical overview today. All of our attendees are muted. However, if at any point during our technical training today you'd like to ask a question, please go ahead and use that Q&A feature that is found in your Zoom webinar controls. We are reserving the last few minutes of our time together today to answer any questions that you may have. So as we progress through our training today, make sure to ask those questions in the Q&A so that we can address those at the end of the session. Now we're going to turn things over in the presentation to Gene Moses, who is part of our Resideo sales team in Florida. Gene is one of our resident experts in dehumidification on the Resideo team, and we're thrilled to have him here with us today. So Gene, we're going to turn things over to you.
All right, thanks, Jamie. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate you taking an hour out of your time. Today, we're going to kind of walk through, as Jamie mentioned, you've got the NATE piece as well as kind of our technical hour today. We'll dive into an overview of kind of what our 4 pillars of IAQ are, and then really dive into humidity control and how we would accomplish that with our whole house dehumidification portfolio. Also touch on piece and how that ties together when we're trying to take control to a little higher level on our dehum side. So we'll do some common questions there at the end, and then of course we'll open up for Q&A. So here we are. I mean, indoor air quality, of course, over the past year and a half, I mean, it's really elevated itself, rightfully so, with everything we've had with the pandemic and heightened level of awareness for indoor air quality. It's always been a piece of the HVAC industry, but I think there are moments in time and where it kind of becomes to the forefront and equipment kind of falls back on the back burner. We're always going to be about temperature control, but now we are in a place where the indoor air quality piece is really elevated itself. And from a Resideo standpoint, we pride ourselves on a really broad portfolio, and the IAQ piece of that is a part that we kind of separate ourselves in the home to be able to provide all 4 pillars, where we can look at humidity control in different parts of the country where that's important, typically more of our northern environments, but sometimes there are applications even here in the Southeast where we may need to add humidity to a certain environment. Maybe it's an art room or some type of space that requires a specific humidity all the time for the items or something that's in that space. So humidity control, both humidification, today we'll be focusing on the dehumidification side, where we'll want to lower humidity, but also from a filtration perspective, full line of filtration from our F100, 200, all the way up to electronic air cleaner side. Of course, air purification on the UV side of the house here to be able to manage indoor air quality from UV, and then also odor neutralizing on our UV product line. And then of course, bottom left there, we talk a lot about ventilation, which is driven a lot of times by the ASHRAE standard in different parts of the country. That's deployed in different ways. In the South, we see ventilation both using our ERV, HRV product line, as well as we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that with our whole house dehumidifier line to be able to kind of manage makeup air a little more effectively in high humid climate. So again, four pillars, and then of course that's all connected there in the middle. You know, Honeywell home, Resideo, history of high level control, both for temperature and humidity. And we'll talk through specifically the controllers that we can control humidity specifically with. That's important to know we've got the right humidifier in, but also knowing that we're going to control that effectively, and probably by way of integrating temp and humidity together in one controller, which makes it really effective and simple for the end user to interact with that system. My little delay here, what's going on? All right, so let's talk a little bit about, you know, how does the dehumidifier work? I think I get that question comes across my desk quite often, and a lot of that's in a correlation with the HVAC equipment itself, where we have an air handler and a condensing unit. We have that AC system per se, where our contractors have kind of fallen prey to what some of those manufacturers tell them, that, hey, that AC system is a dehumidifier. And in some cases it is, but it's not necessarily designed wholeheartedly to be a latent heat remover, right? So in the world of air conditioning, you know, we're about sensible heat and latent heat, two types of loads that we tend to have to manage in a home. The sensible is the dry heat that we're trying to then cool and deliver conditioned air into the space. And when we cool air, the byproduct of that is we have moisture removal. As air is cooled, it's holding moisture. We're going to remove that, but the ratio in our HVAC equipment today, the sensible ratio is typically a little higher than what we can do from a latent load. So a lot of times in a high humid environment, we may need another appliance, whole house dehumidifier that we're seeing here, that serves its primary function as removing moisture. That's what it does. And the inside of our dehumidifiers, what you see here is an example of 75-degree dry bulb air entering into a dehumidifier. It moves across an evaporator, which is effectively super cooling, right? Super cooling that air. And as, again, we mentioned, when we cool air, we're gonna release the moisture. So that moisture is released, and then since we have a condensed appliance that has an evaporator, it has a condenser, it has a fan motor, it has a compressor, so it's a self-contained refrigeration device. We're going to take that across the evaporator, cool it, and then we're going to take that air that's now cool and we're going to reheat it so we can then condense the refrigerant to serve our refrigeration cycle. So that air, one of the questions I get is what should the air temperature be on the outlet of a dehumidifier from the inlet? And typically what we see here is a 15 to 20 degree rise, which is kind of the delta. When we talk about delta, it's air in, air out. What's the difference in those two values? And so our dehumidifiers are really no different. So from a troubleshooting standpoint, knowing that this is a refrigeration system that we're dealing with, we can simply troubleshoot a dehumidifier a lot of times by taking two measurements, inlet temperature and outlet temperature. And we should see a rise across that machine, typically in the 15 to 20 degree range. And then we know at that point that we have a compressor running. We know our fan motor's working, and most likely the machine is effectively operating at what we would provide as a specification for that. So just a really simple slide that gives you kind of the anatomy of what's inside and how that refrigeration circuit works. So that kind of will give those on the call who may question whether a dehumidifier is operating, just simply take a measurement of inlet to outlet. If we get a good temperature rise in the 15 degree range, we can then know that our appliance is working. And from that point, if we're not meeting the expectations of the consumer or even the application, what we thought we would achieve from a humidity standpoint, we would then probably shift our attention to how it's ducted and how it's controlled. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we move forward. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of kind of the anatomy and function mechanically of our dehumidifier. Looking at our portfolio from a product line perspective, we have 3 dehumidifiers today. They are now the 3000 series that we've moved. All product lines have a series evolution. We are now in that 3000 series evolution. So the product line part numbers, we try to always have kind of an identifier with these part numbers that helps you kind of realize what product you're working with. So from right to left, we've got the smallest of the 3, which is a DR65 A3000. That 65 designates 65 pints per day. And then we move to the middle, we have a DR90, 90 pint per day machine. And then we have a DR120, which is our largest of the 3, which is 120 pint per day machine. One thing to note, if you look at this physically, the 120 and the 90, from a size perspective, specification are both equally sized, the same. When we get into the anatomy from the exterior, you'll see that the duct collars are the same on the 90, 120, and the 65. Of course, as you can see that on the screen, is maybe missing that secondary intake there on the bottom left, which is a ventilation port that we provide on those larger 2 product lines to be able to handle some ventilation, intake air, outside air, makeup air, whatever you want to call it. That we can handle that ventilation piece with the dehumidifier. So again, DR65, smaller, 65 pints a day. DR90, 90 pint. DR120 would be our 120 pint machine. All of our product line on the dehumidifier side, we are Energy Star rated. We have the UL listing. So we meet all of the standards from an energy perspective, code perspective. We are compliant, and those are tested and verified. So, from an Energy Star standpoint, when we're dealing with some of those programs that require verification, we can provide that with our dehumidifier product line. Talk a little bit about the 65 individually. Again, it was 65 pints per day. One thing to note, I get asked a lot from a sizing perspective. When we start looking at 65 pints per day, that's just not a flat line that you plug this machine in and it's going to give you 65 pints per day. That's relative to the inlet temperature and relative humidity of the space. And we have in our specifications, we give you a range of temperatures that we're dealing with. But that 65 pints per day is an 80 degree inlet at 60% relative humidity. As temperature and relative humidity in the space drops, then the capacity, of course, and the amount of water we're going to move will decrease as well. If we're dealing with a 100 degree indoor environment and a 90% relative humidity environment, then of course those 65 pint can increase. So we can remove more water as temperature and humidity is up. And of course, as it declines, we may not move as much water. So we want to give you 65 as the baseline. As more questions of what environment we're going to be in. Is it a crawl space, you know, high humid and high temp environment? And then, you know, what type of humidity levels are we looking to achieve? Those application questions, you know, you can reach out to your Resideo rep, distributor partners, and we can kind of talk through that. But DR65 can be centrally ducted or standalone. We do see the DR65 in a lot of standalone applications in the South, via crawl space. Maybe we've got a scenario where we've got a crawl space we're looking to dehumidify. We can stick that machine underneath, drain it, and it has a onboard dehumidistat, so it doesn't need to be externally controlled, which it can or cannot have an external controller, but we do provide an onboard dehumidistat for those standalone applications where we just want to forget it, you know, set it and forget it. Smaller size, of course, compact. We've got a MERV 11 filter that's accessible from both sides. We'll talk through that in a minute. With the anatomy, easy to change the filter. Again, Energy Star rated, and all of our dehumidifiers have a 5-year warranty from date of install. DR90, again, 90 pints per day. All of these machines can be, you know, standalone. We don't have to duct them in. We'll talk a little bit later in the training of what some of those ducted applications look like, kind of best practices. But knowing that we can leave them standalone or duct them. The difference with the 90 and the 120, we need an external controller on the 90 or the 120. The 90, 120 do not come with integrated onboard control. So we need to add some form of an external controller to control these two upper level 90 and 120. Again, filtration MERV 11, 5-year warranty, similar to 65. 120, again, 120 pints per day relative to 80 to 60% relative humidity. We see these larger dehumidifiers can be installed in some light commercial spaces. Again, centrally ducted or standalone. 120, as I mentioned on the 90, needs an external controller. 5-year warranty, of course, similar to all three. Put this kind of in the beginning. One of the questions and application issues that I see pretty regular are draining issues. Depending on how you're going to install the dehumidifier, it's really irrelevant in what you're going to do with the drain line. If you're going to tie it into maybe an existing air handling unit drain, if it's going to be dedicated, had its own individual drain line that's going to exit the space, we need to have a P-trap on. Similar to the air handling units, you got an internal fan, we're moving air through this device. Without a condensate trap, we will prevent this machine from draining effectively because of our negative pressure coming through the drain line. So all you contractors out there that are installing air handlers and trapping them, we know on the dehumidifiers we need a trap. If we're going to tie that in to an existing air handling unit trap, we still need to trap our dehumidifier ahead of joining into that air handling unit. It's something very important. I've had a lot of questions on, you know, my dehumidifier is holding water, tripping the float switch. First question is, do you have a trap on it? Well, I'm using the trap on the air handling unit, or you know, no, I did not. Want to make sure that we call that out, just prevent any water damage or issues that could arise from that. Coil coating. You know, I think everybody in this industry has you know, experienced the challenges that comes from you know, coil leaks that come from environments. You know, we've been in a heavy new construction phase for the past 20 years. So every manufacturer that's got an evaporator coil or some type of a copper coil in a machine or a appliance has possibly experienced that, you know, and it can come from a lot of different constructs that are in a home that are off-gassing, different things, you know, the carpet, the drywall, and different constructs. But We do E-coat our coils. You know, we do everything we can to prevent that. You know, so I think one of the questions that we get a lot of times too, hey, is this a coated coil? You know, maybe we're going to go in a coastal environment where we have, you know, a lot of salt in the air, and the answer is, yeah, we're coating the coils. We're doing as much as we can to make them robust. So whatever environment they're in, that they can last and handle whatever environment that we're going to apply. So we do have a coated coil. Anatomy. So we got the 90 there on the right, 120, similar, you know, footprint, and then the 65. For those out there, you know, I try to touch on things that I get a lot of questions. For distribution, the answer is, hey, we're going to duct this in. What's the inlet outlet collar on a DR65? So if you look there on the right, our inlet and outlet on the 65 are 8-inch. The inlet and outlet on the DR90 and 120 there on the bottom right are 10-inch collars. And then on the DR90 and 120, that inlet collar for the ventilation on the bottom left is a 6-inch round. So pretty simple to think through. If you're going to do a whole house dehumidifier Honeywell home, you're going to be dealing with 6, 8, and 10-inch duct. To install that and integrate that to an existing duct system, or if we're doing, you know, a standalone return and discharge, we're going to be dealing with 6, 8, 10 as the different applications for inlet, outlet, and ventilation. The MERV 11 filter, if you look there on both machines, right next to the collar, you'll see a magnetic strip. Pretty innovative idea, trying to make filter changes as simple as possible for the homeowner or the contractor. If they've got a maintenance agreement and are going to be providing filter changes, you just remove the magnetic door, slide filter in, filter out, no tools needed to do filter changes. Again, call out the onboard dehumidistat, dial, base, mechanical humidistat. And then again, when we talk about our ventilation on the right, knowing that the filter on the 120 and 90 is filtering both ventilation and our inlet air from the space. So one filter on that. Pretty simple, but you know, pretty innovative. Got vibration isolators on the bottom that come in the box. So if we're going to stand, you know, build some type of platform in the attic, the crawl space, we've got the vibration isolators on the bottom, so you can level those machines. Very important that they're level from a draining standpoint, and those are provided to kind of minimize vibration. Move on to controllers. Another question that we get a lot of times on the Resideo side is, you know, I need to do humidity control. What thermostat would you suggest? Well, today we have 4 thermostats that do humidity and temperature control integrated. That top HumidiPro, which is the 3rd from the left, 2nd from the right, is our digital standalone humidity controller. That controller will do both dehumidification and humidification, depending on your application. So you set it up and say, hey, I need humidity control. Then the logic in that controller will, of course, as humidity is lower than set point, we would drive a humidifier. When we're doing dehumidification, the logic is reversed. We're looking at a rise in humidity in the space to drive our contact to bring our dehumidifier. When we're looking at our thermostat portfolio from the top to the bottom there, the Vision Pro Wi-Fi, which I think most of you on this call have probably had some experience with. That thermostat's been out for quite some time, but it's an ideal controller when we start talking about doing single point of control, where we're going to look for a thermostat to both sense humidity and sense temperature from the onboard. That thermostat is located in an ideal spot to both control humidity and temperature. Sometimes that's not always the case. You know, the spot that the thermostat is located may or may not be ideal for both sequences, but if it is, and then also giving the Wi-Fi connectivity piece, giving our customers a remote access via app to that thermostat, great controller, very intuitive, simple to set up from both a humidity and temperature configuration. Of course, the Wi-Fi is on board. So we have the 8000 Wi-Fi, then we move into our RedLink product line. The Prestige and the Vision Pro are both RedLink enabled. And back to my original point, that it's not always that the thermostat is in an ideal location to do both temp and humidity. I find a lot here in the South where we have a tight hallway corridor that maybe has a return located in that hallway. We got a lot of air drafting happening, and we're doing fine, maybe controlling temperature, but it may not be the best location to look at humidity control. A lot of times in those applications, if we can extract that humidity sensor out of the thermostat and maybe locate it inside the space, we would get a better indication of what overall humidity in that home was. So we can control temperature from the onboard, but we have the ability with all three of those thermostats, Vision Pro, RedLink, Prestige IAQ, and now the new T10 Smart, to extract the sensor out for humidity control and temperature for that matter. But when we're talking about humidification, we could then take that sensor and maybe put it in somewhere in the main living area of the home, or a spot that would give us a better indicator of what's going on overall humidity. So again, part numbers, and it's shown on the screen top to bottom. HumidiPro, humidity control only. Someone has a thermostat they're just not willing to part with, but we want to bring in a dehumidifier into the application. We can always install HumidiPro secondary if that particular homeowner may be inclined to upgrade their thermostat and have more of an integrated control platform than the Vision Pro Wi-Fi, Vision Pro RedLink, Prestige, and now the T10 Smart. Great thermostat controllers to integrate humidity and temperature control both together. Talk a little bit about installation application. I think, for me, I spend a lot of time talking through, hey, I want to put a whole house dehumidifier in. What do you think? And, for me, asking what do you think can be a double-edged sword. Because if you ask me, I'm usually going to tell you. But, when we look at applications, we give you some flexibility and we try to give you guidelines. So I think one thing I want to make sure that I do call out, and as I do these trainings live and in person, is, hey, we want to rely on your knowledge as well. You guys do this for a living. We want to give you kind of a baseline of, hey, these dehumidifiers can be installed in the attic, as you see there. We can integrate them with the existing existing HVAC duct system. They could be standalone, where we draw in air from a dedicated return to a dedicated discharge. We've got a garage application. We can find a way to integrate there. Again, I had mentioned earlier about some crawl space. We see a lot of that in South Georgia. We've got encapsulated crawl spaces where humidity and ventilation just stagnant. So we'll do a lot of standalone there where DR65 can be applied just standalone with no ducting. So that in our documentation, we use this as kind of a thinking cap kind of push for you guys to say, okay, yeah, we can deploy this in different applications, and we have the ability to do that. So let's see what's best for us. So that's kind of what the next couple slides are, and then for me giving you what I see as maybe best practices. A lot of times my best practices will be based on what we see a lot of times here in Florida, where we do a lot of dehumidification and where we've had the most success. But we know we're always dealing with some limitations, because this home we're looking at on the screen is owned by someone. And there are some decision makers within that home that will help us decide how we're going to apply it and what they're willing to live with in terms of maybe having to make any modifications to their castle. So that's important to know. For me, we're going to kind of walk through each one of these, and then I'm going to give you a look at what we've kind of found as an ideal scenario based on how HVAC is typically installed in Florida, where we have a lot of attic applications, a lot of garage applications. So if we look from left to right, we'll start with A. In this application, you see the air handling unit, we have our return, we have our supply duct, and then we're installing the dehumidifier, pulling in dedicated return air, and then we're going to use the supply duct system to help us carry that dehumidified air into the space. Kind of take that hot air, as we mentioned in the very beginning, we are going to see a temperature rise. We have maybe 85, 90 degree discharge air out of that dehumidifier. So using the supply duct system in a low volume type airflow environment to dissipate that return air into the space is a desire sometimes. The challenge becomes with A is we have to understand static pressure. So we have to look at that air handling unit, realize that static that we're dealing with for that internal blower motor, and then the static that our dehumidifier is specified at. We may not be able to overcome that. So again, when we're talking about control, three things we have to talk about: how we're going to duct it, and if we're going to duct it in this A scenario, then we need to go to the next question to say, well, what are we going to do for control? Because I may need to set it up to where this dehumidifier blower, this dehumidifier is locked out while we're in a normal temperature control. And then once we satisfy our temperature control, then we'll allow our dehumidifier to take off and run. Backdraft damper is an imperative here for the A application. So when we have the dehumidifier isolated, the standard temperature control call, we're running, no air is moving its way back through the dehumidifier. Once the air handling unit is satisfied, temperature control is satisfied, we unlock that dehumidifier. We'll use the dehumidifier blower, overcome the backdraft damper, and then we'll take off and do our dehumidification call. So important control, how we have it ducted is very, very, very important to understand that if dehumidifier doesn't move any air, for example, get some calls sometimes to say, hey, dehumidifier just isn't doing what I think it should. First question for you in the training today would be, tell me how you have it ducted. If they said to you, I have it ducted supply, I'm discharging into the supply, maybe I'm pulling from the return or have it dedicated. Your question there would be, well, are we running the dehumidifier when we're running the HVAC equipment? If the answer to that is yes, that's where we stop and say, okay, we need to lock that dehumidifier out because dehumidifier is not doing anything. When the air handling unit is running, most likely that static is higher than the dehumidifier blower can handle. So we're just not moving any air. Therefore, of course, that dehumidifier is not going to be dehumidifying. And we could also have some mechanical failure, over temp on the compressor if we're not moving any air. B, another, similar to A, in this application, maybe we're limited. The homeowner does not want us to cut any holes in the home. So we're going to be using the duct system that we have for the HVAC. And then we're just going to, loop that through the dehumidifier. Very similar here where we look for, we're not running that dehumidifier when we're running the air handling unit. In our controllers that we talked about a few seconds ago, that's all in the setup. So when we're configuring our dehumidifier application, we walk through a very intuitive setup that asks us, do we want to allow the dehumidifier to run when we have a cool on call? In A and B, the answer to that would be no. That way our dehumidifier is isolated, idle during temperature calls. Once the temperature is satisfied, those dehumidifiers will take off and run. Move over to C on the top right. We see this a lot in the Southeast. In this particular application, we can run the air handling unit fan and dehumidifier back into the return duct and we're pulling and discharging into the return, we need that air handling unit fan to assist us in dissipating that dehumidified air down through the duct system. So in this particular application, when we're answering that question of, do we want to run the whole house dehumidifier with a call for cooling? The answer could be yes there. We just got to know that we're going to be dumping some hot air, dehumidified air on that evaporator, adding a little bit of sensible load, but probably nothing that that the air handling unit HVAC system can't handle. You guys out there that are contractors, I always kind of put back on the contractor and just understand the little load. Is that an issue for you? If it is, then we'll lock it out on a call for temperature. But we also know when we're setting up the controller that we're just going to tell it, hey, we want the air handling unit fan to run when the dehumidifier is running. And that's a simple configuration selection when we're setting it up. D, so this is, when we start talking about best, better, good. In Florida, one of the things that we realize is locking out that dehumidifier and not having it running. Most of our applications would really, really benefit from the dehumidifier being somewhat as an isolated appliance that it can take off and run as needed. So in D, unfortunately, that may require some conversations with our homeowners that are going to allow us to maybe add a return, and we don't necessarily need to add multiple discharges from our dehumidifier. Maybe it's one in a high foyer area or somewhere in the home that we could discharge some warmer air that wouldn't affect the homeowner. But in this standalone application, we just give that dehumidifier the ability to do its thing without any limitations, without having to really think through any logic changes in the controller to allow it to turn off or be locked out or not. So one of the application designs we do a lot here is we kind of take this D, we use the return from the HVAC system, and then we find a dedicated discharge location in the home where we can dump that dehumidified air into a common area. And when we do that, that gives us an application we can use whether we have zoning or not. One of the things we don't have here, because it would be really a whole nother pretty lengthy conversation, when we have zoning and we want to do dehumidification, we really have to put that dehumidifier in a design that allows it to be separated from HVAC. That way we're not dealing with trying to understand, well, will this damper be open? Will this damper be closed? What's our static going to be? What's going on with our bypass? If we go ahead and just pull from the return in a zoning application, dedicate a supply, then we can pick one of our zone controllers that would be our humidity control, and that dehumidifier can take off and do its thing independent of what's happening on the zone system side. So again, for us, it's baseline, giving you some common installation practices, getting the conversation started, and then relying on all the years of knowledge that you guys have to figure out the best way to deploy it based on limitations that we're presented with at the homeowner level, or that we're presented with, in how the home is constructed. This just gets the conversation started, and know that if installed either of these ways and we control it appropriately, that our outcomes should be, humidity control at a high level. Wiring of the dehumidifier, very simple. We look at the terminal. One thing to note, I think through some of the questions as I do this training, our float terminal. So we have a float terminal. It's 2 pin, comes with an integrated jumper from the factory. So if you want to put an external float switch on our dehumidifier, you would wire into the float terminal and remove the jumper. And then that would, of course, close that circuit. Just want to make sure I call that out. I've had some guys leave the jumper in, not think about it, and then put their float switch in, and of course, maybe have a float scenario that should have tripped and they forgot to remove the jumper. So remove the jumper on the float terminal. Then we also have an integrated transformer So these machines are powered 115 volt, have a standard 115 volt plug, internal transformer where we have our R and C for power and ground common. Our DEHUM terminal is the input. That DEHUM terminal, when 24 volts is applied, will drive the compressor and fan on together. So if all you're doing is installing a dehumidifier, we're not doing any ventilation, we don't need the fan to come on independently. We would just wire from R down through some form of a contact on one of our humidity controllers back into DEHUM. That contact closes, we drive fan compressor on and bring our humidifier on. On the 65, again, want to make sure that it has an onboard dehumidistat. When we want to wire that externally, if we're going to bring in a 65 and not use the onboard controller, we need to make sure we know to turn that one on. And then when we go to external control, then the contact will open and close and drive that dehumidifier on. So DR65, externally controlled, we're going to drive that onboard dehumidistat to on, close it, and then we'll move to an external controller to drive it on. So kind of waited and talk through here. Same thing, we just talked about that with humidistats on board. Again, 90, 120 are going to require the same control. Good to note here, operating temperature, get a question on that a lot. Hey, what environment can the dehumidifiers operate in? 34 to 135. I mean, of course, below 34 degrees, we would be freezing in the drain pan. So, of course, above freezing, 135, I think probably covers the majority of our applications in the South. I've been in some 150 audits over the years. If I get in a 150 audit, I'm going to have a ventilation conversation with homeowner regardless to figure out how we can lower audit temp to begin with, but pretty broad range of operating temperatures for these machines. Filter replacement, again, we start talking about maintenance, really drain line, you guys do these on every day when you're doing a maintenance on an HVAC system. Filter, drain line, and then drive the machine on, maybe test our inlet and outlet temperature just to verify that our refrigerant circuit is healthy. But very basic maintenance from a dehumidification perspective. Magnetic door, pull that magnet door off, pull your filter out, replace filter, and then of course we'll do some drain line maintenance as we do with all of our drain lines. Part numbers, again, DR65 A3000. One thing to note on the filter replacements, and one of the common questions we get is, hey, are these just standard size filters? Unfortunately, no. These filters are made for the dehumidifier, so would be maybe take a screenshot here so you know what your filter part numbers are to get in touch with distribution when you want to replace the dehumidifier filters. The 65 filter at the top there, and then of course the 120 and 90 have the same part number, same size filter.
Thanks so much for products. If you're looking for any additional information on anything that Gene covered today, from the DR65, the DR90, the DR120, or any of those compatible controls, you can find that information at our new resideo.com/pro website. We list installation details, we've got spec sheets and additional information on our products. So make sure that you visit or reach out to your local Resideo sales rep for more information. And as you've seen, Gene did a great job of walking us through the basics of dehumidification. And we're going to cover next some common questions that both he and our sales team hear from customers regularly about dehumidification and our Dehum products. But we also want to hear from you. What questions do you have about the Honeywell home branded dehumidification products? Maybe you've got questions on those humidity control sensors or other application specific questions. Now's the time to ask those questions. So if you do have anything you'd like clarified today based on anything that we've covered, make sure that you take just a few moments and enter that information into the Q&A feature in your Zoom controls, and we will do our best to answer those questions in the time that we have remaining.
While you're maybe thinking through some questions, maybe these four here, we'll cover a couple of those. So one of the questions we get, does the ventilation opening require a cap when you're not using for ventilation? And the answer would be yes. If you've got an attic application, you're not doing ventilation on the 90 or the 120, and you've got your 10-inch inlet, 10-inch discharge, and then we've got the 6-inch ventilation port that we do need to cap, or we would be dehumidifying the attic in that application. If it's standalone in a crawl space, then absolutely not. You could leave both ports open. We'll pull through both and be fine there. But anytime we're not doing standalone and we're going to be ducted and we don't have ventilation as a part of our sequence or a desired part of the application, then you would want to cap that. What type of refrigerant is used? It's R410A, which the majority of refrigerant in this space is, of course, at 410A product line today. So yeah, we got 410A in the refrigerant. Back to the point I called out on the filters. Are these filters standard size? Unfortunately not. They're dedicated part number for the DR65, and then the same filter size for the DR90 and 120. And then one of the questions we've seen is, why do Honeywell home branded thermostat use a preset differential of 15% between dehum and humidity contact closures? The answer to that is if we're doing humidification and dehumidification from one sensor, which we can do that. We can have both sequences running in a controller, but there's got to be a deadband. So that's our deadband between switching from the desire to do humidity to then the desire to do dehumidification. If we wanted that flat line, for example, if I did a humidifier, I guess is the thing for a cigar, I'm not sure what the right word of that is, but they wanted to flatline 50%. In that case, we had a humidifier and a dehumidifier both installed, but we needed to use two red link sensors, one for humidity and one for dehumidification. So we have two external sensor points, right? And at that point, we can then, once we use that external sensor, we can then say, hey, we want a flat line. And that's with the Prestige controller. We can flatline and drive both sequences. We can have an offline conversation, but just know out of the box, if we're going to do both sequences with the onboard sensor, there's a dead band in between there, similar to what we do if we're doing auto mode for temperature, where we want to have some type of space between driving heat or cool. I see a couple questions. Jamie, do you want to call those out?
Yeah, I'd love to. I can take this first one. We've got a question about, will these webinars be available to watch afterwards? And the answer to that is yes. If you give us a couple of days, you will see the link to this webinar show up on that webinar recordings tab on our resideo.com/webinars website. We will make sure to get that out there, and you can also go out to that link and find previous recordings of previous sessions as well. And then it looks like we've got a question about, is there a diagram for installation in a crawl space?
Yeah, so from a crawl space, I'll jump back up here. Really, if you look here on the application down at the bottom for a crawl space standalone, typically what we would see on the crawl space would be a non-ducted DR65. It would be, on some center block, some type of a platform underneath, elevated enough where you could get the drain line out from under the crawl space. But most of our crawl spaces would be just a standalone kind of application, non-ducted.
Great. And then we've got a question about how to get a NATE ID. And my recommendation there is to reach out to the NATE program for more information. You can find their website at www.natex.org, and they can get you started with finding the process for getting a NATE identification number. All right, and I think that is all of our questions. So thanks so much for walking us through these questions and for this great training today, Jean, and thank you to all of our attendees. We appreciate your engagement with us as we share the details of these dehumidification products and walk through installation applications with all of you. We're going to wrap up some things today with just a few additional pieces of information on the trainings that we have available. And Jean, if you want to skip forward a little bit, we value our relationships with not only our distributor and our contractor partners, and training is a big part of that. And if you want to go back just one slide there, Jean, we recently launched an online digital training portfolio where we are publishing in-depth technical and sales trainings for all of our customers. And you can access this training by visiting the training page on that Resideo Pro website. And the first time that you access that online training catalog, you're going to be asked to create a Pro Portal account. And then going forward, you'll log into your Pro Portal account to access any of these trainings. And right now, we've got over 20 online learning modules that are available, including several modules that are on our dehumidification portfolio. So if you find yourself in a couple of weeks wanting a refresh on anything that Jean covered, or you're looking for some additional information, just know that we've got dehumidification modules that cover not only the technical details of our dehumidification portfolio, but we also offer a sales training module as well for these products. And we encourage you to enroll and take these trainings as you have time throughout your week. And then also, if you are a Resideo Pro Perks member, you will receive training credit when you enroll and take these online training courses as well. We're very excited about adding this online training catalog to our training offerings for all of you, and want to make sure that you're aware of these trainings that are available to you. And then also, we are continuing to offer our customer webinar series twice each month. Make sure that you register and visit the resideo.com/webinars website and go under that HVAC tab for more information and register for those upcoming sessions. And as a reminder, next week on April 27th, we are going to be covering UV air purification, and we also have our May schedule up on the website as well. And then, as we referenced before, we do record each of these sessions, and you can find those recordings on the same website underneath the webinar recordings tab. And then one final reminder for our contractors who did not include your NATE ID on your registration form, and you'd like information and to receive credit for today's session, make sure that you send an email with your first name, your last name, and your NATE ID number to homes.university@resideo.com within 1 week post today's training, and we'll make sure that you get credit for attending today's live session. And then two final things to note: once our session ends today, you are going to be prompted to complete a survey regarding our webinar session. Make sure to take just a few minutes to provide us with your feedback on the training that you participated in today. We are very interested not only in your feedback on today's session, but we use that feedback to help us create future training. So that feedback is really important to us, and we do read and look at all of that. Also, if you have suggestions for future trainings that you'd like to see us cover, we'd like to hear those suggestions as well. And then finally, you are going to receive an email from us in just a few days that includes some follow-up information on the products that we reviewed today, as well as a link to the website for more information on those products. And then we look forward to having you join us for our next training on April 27th, where we are going to be reviewing our UV air purification portfolio. So thank you so much for joining us for today's Resideo webinar session. Have a great day, everyone.